All right, so we're gonna finish up with The Fall by Albert Camus today, and um, we'll have Walter summarize where we are or how we got here in a moment. But I just wanted to start off with a quote from the book that I found really interesting. It's in the end. It's at the beginning of the last chapter, and he says. The lead character, who of course has been sort of pleading his case, he's a former high-ranking or much respected French lawyer who's now somehow found himself in the red light district in Amsterdam and is pleading his case to an undescribed person in a bar called Mexico City, and he's saying, "But what do I care? Don't lies eventually lead to the truth?" And don't all my stories, true or false, tend toward the same conclusion? Don't they all have the same meaning? Then just a little bit later, he said, truth, like light, blinds. Falsehood, on the contrary, is a beautiful twilight that enhances every object. And it appears to me that this is a core point that he's trying to make, not just about his own guilt, in the scheme of things cosmically, but also about what is the right way to act. And he's arguing, I think, that falsehood is in some ways better than truth, or superior or more flexible or something. I don't know, Walter. Help me out. What does that line mean? And also, how did we get here?
Well, I think he's saying, as the French often do, and I said in an earlier episode, that the French love paradox, like
Russians
from
love
Milwaukee.
vodka,
Yeah, like people from Milwaukee love bratwurst. I mean, if they can find one, and if they can articulate it, and if they can, polish it, that's a day well spent on the left bank of Paris in the cafes, especially in those days. I think what he means is that, it is falsehood that causes us to long for the truth. It's falsehood that reveals our humanity. I mean, in some ways, machines, animals, and other beings will respond only to the truth. But the all too human innovation is to lie. And it is lies that create romance. He says it spreads a wonderful kind of twilight over things. Well, in courtship, and a lot of this book is about seduction, is it not the lies about ourselves and the lies that we agree to believe about the other person that make it, intriguing and, interesting and possible to love? In the cold, bright, and even light of the truth, the world that Hillary Clinton acts like she lives in, everything is equal before, fact, before scientific judgment. And there is no intrigue, there's no shadow, there's no interest, there's no fascination, there's no revelation. Falsehood is what allows revelation, just like clothing is what allows strippers to be strippers.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And so he's saying we're lost without it. We're really not ourselves without it. And in a way, don't we prefer it? But
it's such a lawyer's argument. But go ahead. Yeah.
And there's a lot of lawyerly arguments. And two things. First of all, in the bath this morning, I'm in this hotel where there's a bath that's about 6 feet deep. You can get it so it's really up to your neck. And I was reading, of course, on a Kindle, the last part of The Fall, keeping it out of the water. And for some reason, it came over me, because I've been alone too much, that this whole book should be read in the voice of Orson Welles. The Orson Welles of The Third Man, if you know.
Oh my movie. God. I was just watching that movie. One of my favorite movies.
And so
if you haven't seen The Third Man, by the way, folks, go see The Third Man.
And what have the Swiss accomplished? The cuckoo clock.
That's right. Good day, Holly.
And in a way, doesn't Orson Welles in that movie make the same argument?
Exactly the same argument. He's the same character.
Sympathy for the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody on Twitter said, this is the least sympathetic great character I've ever read, along with someone in Dostoevsky, maybe, I think it was
the Inquisitor,
Karamazov himself, who said, who he said he didn't like, who's too sentimental. But anyway, in the voice of Orson Welles, as interpreted by Walter Kirn, I'll read my own passage. No excuses, ever, for anyone. That's my principle at the outset. I deny the good in intentions, the respectable mistake, the indiscretion, the extenuating circumstances. With me, there is no giving of absolution or blessing. Everything is simply totted up, and then comes to so much. You are an evildoer, a satyr, a congenital liar, a homosexual, an artist, etc. I love how he leaves artist at the very end of the list of, criminal or illicit types. But what he is saying, and what the principle of suspense in this book really is not what happened to him when he walked past the suicide who jumped into the Seine without doing anything. We passed that point in the middle of the book. What he really wants to reveal to us in the end is, what is this thing he keeps calling himself? A judge penitent. What is that? What is a judge penitent? And in the end, in the last movement of the book, he does a pretty good job of explaining it. And what he says is, I have judged myself as harshly as I can. I've shown you all my falsity. I've shown you that in my modesty and in my good deeds, I was really a narcissist. I've shown you that, in my declarations of love, I was really just a sensualist who wanted to get in women's pants. I've shown you that I have no redeeming characteristics. And in this, I am like the entire human race. In fact, if I'm guilty, then you all are, because I did noble deeds. I did, I made the great gestures. I defended the unjustly accused. I helped the blind across the street. If I'm bad, then you all are.
And in fact, he even says, the more I accuse myself, the more I have a right to judge you.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. And what does that remind you of, Matt? How many times have I been told by a white guy about white privilege? Okay.
Right.
And I always think, wait a second. What is absolving you from the guilt that you're imputing to me? Oh, because you're onto yourself, I guess.
Right.
And that's what he's talking about. He's talking about that if you convict yourself first, then you have the right to judge others. And how many people do that nowadays? Is that not almost the endemic mental and emotional and psychological state of the NPR listener? I'm on to myself for my privilege, my cisgender bias, and therefore I have the right to almost put you in jail for it.
I mean, not only do I admit it, I wallow in this content, telling me about it all day long, right?
Right.
And so, of course, I'm morally superior, right?
Right. So a judge penitent is someone who becomes a judge and gains the right to judge and to serve judgment and maybe even punishment through having confessed and acknowledged their own sinfulness first. And it's a terrifying idea, because that means there is a way to convert guilt into righteousness, into virtue. And that's what we do as modern people. Every day, open any newspaper, listen to any broadcast, and somewhere you are hearing somebody who, by virtue of having become aware of our collective guilt, feels they have the right to judge somebody.
Yeah, right, exactly. And a lot of these people, they get this way because they're in a bubble, right? They have surrounded themselves entirely with the intellectual equivalent of mirrors, where all they're doing is looking at their own points of view, um, or things they agree with, people who agree with them. Remember the South Park song, like, about safe spaces, like, people who agree with me surrounded by more people who agree with me. Like, that's the experience. So, that leads us to maybe the last sort of hidden trick of this book. I mean, you and I were talking about it off camera. Who exactly was Clemence talking to?
Who is Clemence's audience?
Who is Clemence's audience? And I'm going to let you give it away. But before I get there, this is a lawyer. The part of the drama of this book is that you are listening to a master arguer, right? And you get the same kind of thrill that you get listening to or sort of reading an opening statement by a Clarence Darrow, or I don't know what's another great famous lawyerly peroration. I'm trying to remember, like, from The People versus Larry Flint. Those arguments that you hear in court. But along the way, I start detecting false notes in it. Not in the quality of the argument, but that there's something missing. Those great lawyerly arguments, what makes them amazing is the convincing. It's one person against the world, trying to move a diverse audience, to bring them all over to his or her point of view. And you're not sure suddenly that that's what's going on in this book. And so what is it exactly that's happening?
So at the end, he basically reveals what he's been up to. And he says, I'm going to reveal it. He says, it sounds like I've been confessing this whole time. But really, I've been building my case for accusing you. I have confessed to the point where I am now in a position to judge you. And it turns around, and you start to think about, who is he talking to? Who's he been talking to this whole time? In a way, as a reader, you realize he's talking to the human race, right? I mean, he's talking to everyone in a literary sense. In a literary sense.
Right. That's what I thought.
Right, but that's what you think. Or he's talking to every man in some way. But here are the clues as to who he's really talking to. One, throughout the book, the other person never talks back. Never questions anything, never disputes, never gets a word in edgewise. At the end, he's taken the person, his audience, who has showed up night after night, despite never getting a word in edgewise. They've showed up for
never late. Yep.
Never late. And they've showed up for 5 consecutive nights of monologues from this guy. Who does that? Who goes to the same bar every night to listen to one monologuist go on and on about his life in Paris and his narcissistic self-love and other things. And then finally, the last part is not said in the bar, but in the home of Jean-Baptiste Clemence. He invites the person home and he says, look around. I know it's a humble place, and I know I don't have many decorations. In fact, it's as clean as a coffin, he says. He keeps comparing his apartment to a coffin. And then he says, oh, but let me show you something in my closet. And he shows him a stolen painting that actually in history was a stolen painting. Part of a triptych, a religious triptych, and it's something like the Judgment of the Lamb. I can't remember its title. But it's an incredibly valuable painting. And he shows a stranger that he has it in his house. And he says, I keep hoping that someday one of the people I bring home will be a policeman. And they'll convict me for the theft of this painting, and I'll go to jail, which will be a kind of relief after all this sort of agonizing freedom. Because one of the themes of the book is that our freedom is agonizing. And at one point, Jean-Baptiste even argues that universal slavery will be the ultimate democracy. He says that explicitly, because we'll all be suffering equally under the yoke, finally, rather than in these unequal and subjective and differential ways.
Again, does that feel familiar at all? But go ahead.
Yeah. So having invited this person home, having shown him the secret painting that, get him life in prison for having stolen, he says this at the end. But of course, you are not a policeman. That would be too easy. What? I suspected as much, you see, that strange affection I felt for you. That strange affection I felt for you had sense to it then. In Paris, you practiced the noble profession of lawyer. I sensed that we were of the same species. Are we not all alike, constantly talking and to no one?
Right.
Constantly talking and to no one. Forever up against the same questions, though we know the answers in advance. Then please tell me what happened to you one night on the quay of the Seine, and how you managed never to risk your life. Wait, he's saying that the guy's not only a lawyer, not only from Paris,
but he let somebody drown in the Seine.
But he let somebody drown, and he's also saying, are we not all alike, constantly talking and to no one? Well, how much more clearly could he reveal that he's been talking to himself the entire time, and that he is in fact a judge penitent? And this is the answer to the mystery. How can you be both a judge and a penitent? By dividing yourself into two and addressing one as if it was another. And we realize this is the story of the world's loneliest guy, involved in a constant dialogue between the part of him that feels guilty and the part of him that feels superior. A conflict that will never end, that goes on in the human psyche. The conflict between the part of us that believes we're special and the part of us that knows we're not.
But the evil of this character is that this constant inner dialogue does not lead to any positive place. It only leads to an endless loop of self-forgiveness for transgressions, right? And it ends up becoming an argument for immorality, for dishonesty, for absolving oneself of anything. And the fact that this person has a schismatic personality, doesn't make him a better person. Doesn't dilute the effect of the evil. This is a highly intelligent person who knows that he's got two sides to his personality, and in fact is very skillfully engaging in this self-dialogue, almost as a show. Right, whether it's for himself or for somebody else, it's not clear. But either way, this is not the ramblings of an insane person. I mean, in Crime and Punishment, the main character Raskolnikov. Raskol means split in Russian, right? So it's a split personality who ends up justifying immorality because the other side of his personality says that it's for a good cause. That's exactly what this person is doing, except this person is much, much slicker, older, and more practiced than Dostoevsky's villain, right? So I find him. I mean, he's repulsive in an almost like insectoid way by the end of the book to me.
Yes, he is. But in the end, he's also pathetic, because as you finally realize that he's talking to himself, as you realize that this moment of moral cowardice in which he let a woman fall, jump into the Seine, and then walked on without so much as a backward glance and without even looking in the paper the next day. At that moment, his ability to believe himself innocent, his ability to believe in a sort of fantasy of his own virtue was shattered. But he can't live with that. So he goes constantly around and around, but the very end is, you talked about the book as a Moebius strip, and that this is even more of a Moebius strip.
Right. Yeah.
When you realize that the person he's seducing and trying to convince and can never convince, he can never fully judge, nor can he fully exculpate himself. And there's a little metaphor that he uses, a medieval torture device called the Little Ease. That's the translation. And it was a medieval torture device, which was basically a cell into which the prisoner was put. And it had certain proportions. You could never quite stand up all the way in it, and you could never quite lie down all the way in it. You were always just a little uncomfortable, always having to contort yourself, never able to relax, never able to sleep, never able to stretch. And that really is his permanent condition. He's never going to be able to be fully one thing or fully the other. He'll always be judging himself, and he'll always be pleading with the judge.
Yes, but that's true. Okay, so he's trapped in this hellish loop. I mean, it's literally hell in the sense that hell is endless. There is no escape from it, and he is trapped.
Sartre, his friend, and then later rival and almost enemy, as his peer existentialist philosopher, French resistor of Nazism, fellow leftist, okay, said famously, hell is other people.
Yeah,
in the plain no exit.
From Les Jeux Sans Fait, that's right, yeah.
Hell is other people. Camus is saying, hell is yourself.
Well, that's believable. I believe that, but it's a hell of his own creation, I think, because his fatal flaw as a person is his impenetrable narcissism and his inability to recognize that there could be a higher judge. Right. I mean, not to go back to Crime and Punishment again, but the salvation for Raskolnikov is that he confesses in the end, right? Like, and his confession, I always thought that part of the book worked for me. Like it's sincere. It's the desire for salvation, like all those things. This person is too cynical for that.
And he talks explicitly about sort of wishing in a way that he could believe in God, and actually he talks about how among his sort of, philosopher or left wing or bourgeois intellectual friends, he sometimes would mention God just to get other people's goat. And he talks about how moral philosophers who pretend not to believe in God actually do, that most of his so-called atheist friends aren't real atheists. Secretly, they're believers. He says 80%.
There's a great line. For example, I know an atheistic novelist used to pray every night. That didn't stop anything. How he used to give it to God in his books. What a dusting off, as someone or other would say.
Right. And then he talks about a guy who was an atheist when he was being faithful to his wife, but became religious when he became an adulterer.
Right, right.
which is
Yeah.
which is another of the psychologically acute moments in this book, because the thing that gives it, a constant feeling of stimulation and pleasure are these apercusa and these insights about human nature and these sort of devastating psychological observations that just pile up. It's as though Camus had a notebook of sort of paradoxical maxims about human life, and he managed to get them all into one narrative. Sometimes the narrative seems like a contrivance for him to just make all the statements he wants about what is it to be human.
Well, that's true. But what I think he's doing, though, in this book is that he's drawing a portrait of there are a lot of people who are like this, who are highly intelligent and can't think their way out of certain moral dilemmas. So they go on, and they go on justifying and doing wrong. Right?
You're right, Matt. I mean, this is not someone we're meant to emulate. This is not someone who represents success in processing the human predicament. This is finally the presentation of a specimen.
Right.
And the specimen is one that is all too common, especially among the bourgeois, as he says.
Right.
It's a book that's meant to trigger recognition and disgust in the reader. Insofar as but you're right to say, finally, he's a very deformed individual who for all his suppleness, all his logic, all his charisma and subtlety of expression. It's kind of a horror show.
No, it is. It's hell. The once you get to the end of the book and you realize that it's this loop that will never stop, you start imagining the depths of this intellectual despair, and maybe this is something that he was experiencing after the Holocaust. I mean, he doesn't strike me that he had a whole lot to feel guilty about reading his biography, but maybe he was describing a type of character who repulsed him, or I don't know.
This is part of his art. I invite people who read the book to delve into the relationship between Camus and Sartre after the war, when they kind of had a falling out. In some ways, this is a riposte, an attack on Sartre. Okay, that's really what it is in biographical terms. I have a friend on Twitter. His name's Ivan Keneally, and he is a former Brooklyn College. Is that what it's called? Philosophy professor and an expert on these things, and he taught me a lot about the book, and really its origins lie in his argument with Sartre. But he says something at the very end that really leaves us in a strange place. He says to his doppelganger, his mirror image, and he may be just talking into the mirror or the air, well, what if I had a second chance? What if I had a second chance to go back to that bridge and hear that woman splash into the water and hear her cry as she does and go rescue her? What if I had back that moment that I've previously failed through cowardice to morally react to? And he says, oh, God, thank God that won't happen. Thank God I won't have to ignore her again. He says, a second time, eh? What a risky suggestion. Just suppose, cher maître, that we should be taken literally. We'd have to go through with it. Brr, the water's so cold. But let's not worry. It's too late now. It will always be too late.
That's the end of the book.
Fortunately.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Meaning the idea that we could go back and improve our behavior would probably show us that we won't. Thank God we don't get second chances.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's, what if we could go back? What he's saying essentially is, what if we could go back and save the Jews from the Holocaust? What if we could go back and, I don't know, keep Hitler from becoming...
Yeah, not brutalize the Algerians, whatever it is, right?
Right. He'd say, thank goodness we can't do that, because if we did, we'd go make the same mistake and we'd realize we're absolutely a hopeless species and hopeless people. And at least we don't have to prove it. At least it won't be proved by us making the same mistake a second time. It's just like with people say, oh, if only we could go back to the beginning of COVID and not close the schools and not shut down the economy. No, all that would be accomplished then is you'd go back, do the same thing, and realize you're terminal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very dark conclusion. It couldn't possibly be darker, and it's funny because all of these great philosophical novelists, they come down in different ways. Some of them find ways to console themselves. Tolstoy and Dostoevsky did it through religion. Oscar Wilde punished himself severely, right? Sort of asking some of the same questions, and rather than trapping himself in this endless hell, just pronounced himself guilty essentially at the end, right? And in the Picture of Dorian Gray, like always, these great writers are either finding some kind of consolation in the end, or they're or they're trying to say something dark about how there is no escape. I don't know. I feel like in this book, what's most powerful to me is that this feels like a portrait of a timeless kind of dishonest person who thinks this way.
The particular sin, the particular public sin that he's really talking about is actually not the Holocaust, and it's not Nazism. It has to do with the revelation of the crimes of Stalin. What he's really saying is that the left, and this is 1956, remember, the left has excused this dictatorship on the basis of it being, ideologically, politically, correct. But it committed great crimes. And what led to Camus' demise, if you believe certain parties, is that he supported the Hungarian Revolution, 1956, when the Hungarians rose up against the Soviets and were crushed. And he looked around at his leftist friends and he said, my God, how can we do this? It happened in America too. It's the rise of the neocons in a way. The disaffected leftists who went, oh my God, the crimes of Stalin now have been revealed. We've been supporting, for political reasons, a regime that is a nightmare and is oppressive itself, and we're guilty. And he wanted, and he felt that way. Now, if he was indeed killed by the KGB, I brought this up before and I've researched it since. There are reasons to believe, and there are confessions that were supposedly made to the effect that Camus was killed in 1960 by the KGB because he had become an anti-Soviet intellectual. And his car, and the car he was traveling in, it wasn't his car, was supposedly, allegedly sabotaged such that it crashed. But it's the guilt of the left that he's worried about in this book, and that he's kind of enacting,
I mean, that's fascinating, right? Because we talked about this, but it dovetails with with some of Orwell's
Yeah.
experiences too, right? And it makes a lot of the passages in the book make sense. You know, he keeps mentioning slavery, and he talks about how I'm well aware that slavery is not immediately realizable. It will be one of the blessings of the future. That's all. And that's some scary. It's scary, right? Like, and probably at this time in history, it was not hard to imagine that could be the very near future, right? For a lot of people, and it was for a huge portion of the globe, essentially, right? During that period, I mean, that was that was actually the height of the Soviet expansion, right? Was coming right around the corner. And yeah, there were a lot of intellectuals who were down with it at the time, but I think this is a type. It's a type that you see that was predicted in a lot of those 19th century novels too, as a lot of these ideas were becoming fashionable. Um, and yeah, so and he even talks about how it, I forget how he puts it, but it's almost like the intelligent ones are more susceptible, or it's harder with the intelligent ones, or something like that. Um, but it just makes it a more convincing portrait to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an indictment of the thinker. It's an indictment of the rationalizer. You always find a way out, don't you, of your own cowardice. You always find a way to rationalize your own blindness. You always find a way to disengage when you should be engaged, and to make a big deal of your engagement when in fact you're doing it for publicity or to create goodwill, or, be a hero. I think Camus finally doubted, and he expressed it through this character, whether anyone could be so just that they could sit in judgment on another, and especially on their life. It's an argument for humility, even though the character himself isn't to be emulated. I think what he's saying is that this is the kind of people out there who want to judge you.
Yes. Exactly. That's what what we were talking about before, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we have to be afraid of. I don't think it's an accident that a lot of the villains in other literature, when they're overly in their heads, and they ignore the physical aspect of their lives, that they become susceptible to these really bad ideas. Like I think it's a constant theme in books that people who don't have a balance of the real and the intellectual get into trouble, right? And you can go in both directions. But this is all intellectual. This book, right? You don't even know if the bar is real at the end.
In every, let's say, James Bond movie, or in every movie in which there's clear-cut villain, every thriller, every suspense movie, there's always a moment where the villain gets their say to the hero and says, Mr. Bond, I know you represent the Queen and the great kingdom of Britain, but do you not realize this is a fallen species which has only gotten so far through death, through warfare, through the constant competition of what you call evil with the supposed good? I am merely the product of glorious evolution, and you, sir, are carrying out the feeble dictates of a dowager queen.
Well, that's Harry Lime in the third Man, right?
Exactly.
The Swiss were wonderful, but what did they ever produce? The cuckoo clock, right?
Right.
The Borgias were monsters, and they produced all these amazing things. So draw your own conclusions.
If you imagine a villain who is given infinite time to make that speech, and infinite eloquence and wit, and and pseudo honesty, that would be the fall.
Exactly, and I think for this time period, especially as people move more online and their lives become more hyper intellectualized and maybe
performative.
performative, and they may even be talking to bots more than real people than they know. This personality type is going to proliferate.
Dude, he could have been talking to Grok the whole time.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Right. So it's very pertinent to the present. It's also a book that I find is very rereadable because the prose is so punchy and full of one-liners and gorgeous constructions that you can just pick it up at any juncture, and because it's a loop, it doesn't matter whether you forget where you are in the story. Right?
Boy, but Matt, that is an important point. There are some books that you must read from beginning to end, and there are some books in which you don't read part of it. Nobody reads the last quarter of Huck Finn, or and there are other books that are really only good in parts. This is one that's almost like a kaleidoscope. You can go in at any point and read, any bit of it, a page, 2 pages, a chapter, and you can still fall under its spell.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like an intellectual version of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, where
yes,
you can pick up any page of that book and it's just fun to read, right? And then this is kind of similar. It's a little bit of a bigger bite,
and the same lengths
right?
As Fear and Loathing. That I don't know why, and I don't have time to explore it here, but that is one of the most apt comparisons I've ever heard, because actually Fear and Loathing is a kind of self-justification, like this book.
It's also a monstrous self-accusation.
Yes,
that book. I mean, and people that's one of the things that always bothered me about Hunter Thompson. I know we've gone on too long, but because he's such a beloved author here in the States, and I feel like people get this wrong about Hunter. They think he's this super self-indulgent, egomaniacal jerk, when the book is actually full of self-accusation. And the reason the jokes work is because he knows exactly what a fuck up he is, and how he always fails. Like his timing is sort of perfectly wrong in every one of the stories. It's because he knows himself so well that those books work. I'm glad you said that. I feel like
I feel like you hit not by accident but by intuition on one of the great comparisons: Fear and Loathing and The Fall. Both books in which, in some ways, you feel drawn to the character. You want to imitate them. They seem freer than you, or wiser, or more advanced in some ways, but
funnier.
But in both books, the narrator turns to you at the end and says, "Don't you think that this was an inspirational tale? This was a caution. This was a cautionary tale. We blew it. We lost. We suck. Goodbye."
Yep. Exactly. So this is cautionary tale, but very relevant, and I'm really glad you picked out. I had no idea I
that it was out there.
Yeah, exactly. So this goes on the reread shelf. I have one of those back here somewhere.
Good.
But thanks everybody for hanging in. Thanks for listening to us rant all day about these various things. I have a feeling next week is going to be a busy week. I have no idea why, but something tells
one does
me
get a sense of the rhythms of these things.
Yeah.
And we all know that October is a very serious month.
Right. Rocktober, as they say in classic rock radio. So thanks a lot, everybody.